As Russia and Ukraine continue to trade both threats and attacks, the U.S. is in the picture yet again over its supply of weapons to Kyiv. After Moscow blamed Washington for Ukraine's recent attack on Crimea and vowed revenge, the defense chiefs of the two nations engaged in a rare conversation. The two sides gave widely divergent accounts of the phone call between U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Russia's Defense Minister Andre Bosov. The Pentagon says Austin initiated the conversation and that he believes that keeping lines of communication open is important. Russia's defense ministry, however, says that Bosov has warned Austin of the dangers of continued arms supply to Ukraine. And this is not the first warning of its kind. The Kremlin warned the U.S. of consequences after Ukraine struck Crimea's Sevastopol during the weekend using a U.S.-made ATACMS missile. These threats circle back to Western weapon shipments to Ukraine that have become an increasingly sour point for Moscow. But as Bosov engaged in talks, the previous post holder, former Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, was issued a warrant of arrest by the ICC. And Shoigu was not alone. Russia's most senior military officer, General Valery Gerasimov, was also hit with an arrest warrant over strikes against civilian targets. The Kremlin has said that it considers the warrants to be absurd, adding that Russia does not recognize the court's jurisdiction. But even as the International Criminal Court delivered a stinging condemnation of Russia's invasion, Russia launched 42 glide bombs on the northeastern Kharkiv region over a 24-hour period, and this is according to local authorities. On the other hand, multiple air attacks by Ukraine were reported on the southern Russian region of Belgorod. The governor said an elderly woman was killed, 4 people were injured, and scores of buildings were damaged. Russia's defense ministry said its air defense systems destroyed 29 Ukraine-launched drones over the region. Meanwhile, Russia and Ukraine each handed back 90 prisoners of war on Tuesday, with the United Arab Emirates overseeing the exchange as an intermediary. Russia said prisoners brought home had faced mortal danger in captivity. This is the latest of several periodic swaps in the 28-month-old conflict. Let's now talk more about this. Retired Colonel Lloyd Austin is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation. He is now joining us from Gaziantep, Turkey. Colonel Rich, good to see you, and thank you very much for joining us at this hour. What do you think will be Ukraine's or Kyiv's response to the two defense ministers of America and Russia holding a conversation and saying that they'll keep their line of communication open?
Well, it's good to be with you, Eric. I think Kyiv's in an interesting situation here because it has conditional support from the United States rather than an unconditional support. So it's fighting a war, a defensive war against the aggressor, Russia, with one eye behind its front, always thinking how much will the U.S. allow us to do, and being put in the position of having to press the United States for more authorities. Now, the systems that we've given, including now the F-16s that are coming online, ATACMS missiles, as you mentioned before, artillery systems that can shoot further and see further, have been kept under a certain leash. The United States has tried to play a control game in terms of escalation to try to not attack onto Russian territory, even though the Russians are, of course, attacking throughout the depth of Ukrainian territory in order to limit how this goes. So the concept here is horizontal escalation rather than vertical escalation. The United States wants to keep it from going too high in terms of the types of weapons and maybe becoming a direct U.S.-Russia conflict, and instead letting at the margins this becomes certain types of systems allowed to attack, say, in Crimea or in Belgorod, as you mentioned. So there is some horizontal escalation being played. For Ukraine, I think they just have to keep pushing the envelope. They have to keep convincing Washington that, look, if you really don't want us to lose this war, don't have one of our hands tied behind our back. We need to be able to hit the aggressor as deep in his country as he is hitting us in ours.
Colonel Rich, despite Russia saying that now that we are talking, we cannot forget what happened in Sevastopol in Crimea, where the ATACMS missiles were used by Ukrainian forces to hit civilians, and 150 civilians were injured in that attack. 4 people were killed in that attack. Russia says that Washington will face consequences. What do you think these consequences are?
Well, I think Russia's implying by this that they will try to have systems put close to either the United States or to allies of the United States that can put into peril civilian targets as well, as if there is a parallel there. Of course, the difference being that the United States has not launched an offensive war against a major sovereign country like Ukraine, which is what Russia has done. So the implication from Russia that we will put you in the same sort of peril that you're putting us in ignores the moral dimension of the fact that they are aggressor. That put aside, though, we've seen this before. During the Cold War, Russia put missiles in Cuba to try to threaten the United States at the same time that the United States had missiles in Turkey, where I happen to be at the moment, that were in a position to conduct attacks against the Soviet Union. In that case, neither side escalated into a direct Soviet versus American escalation. After John F. Kennedy took certain strong deterrent steps, then both sides stepped back from that. So I think Russia's probably trying to do the inverse of that. They are probably trying to get the United States to back down from allowing Ukraine a greater leash in the use of its defensive weapons by implying the ability to threaten either the U.S. homeland or U.S. allies. The difference here, of course, is that Russia, I don't think, really has the ability to do that, and neither in their strategic arsenal nor in their set of allies along our borders. And frankly, I don't think they want to go into that escalation game with us. If they got a president willing to play escalation right, other than the current soft administration, they might find themselves incurring significantly higher costs.
Very quickly, Colonel Rich, as we end this conversation, what do you think will be the impact of these threats by Russia, that if you continue, to the West that is, that if you continue to supply Ukraine with your weapons, we will revenge, we will come for you?
Well, unfortunately, I think it'll have some effect. The Biden administration has shown a willingness to do what we call self-deterrence by consistently thinking, well, if we make the Russians mad, or if we escalate to a point that the Russians find unacceptable, we can't incur those costs. Of course, that's not how escalation works. Escalation works or deterrence works in escalation when you convince the other side that they don't know the cost they'll incur. And when you imply, well, we certainly don't want to incur costs up to this level, which is what the Biden administration has again and again communicated to Russia, then Russia knows exactly how far it can go. Introducing to Russia the idea that they don't know how much pain we can inflict on them and that we're willing to go higher is the way to stop their acts of aggression and their escalating aggression. Unfortunately, against this current counterpart that they have in the Biden administration, I think that they're talking about escalation in this way probably will get the Biden administration to put further restrictions on what Ukraine does.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. I've been talking to Colonel Rich Austin, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation. Colonel Rich, as always, thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.